Mori, trainer, coach, and director of Power You Philippines, and we welcome you to this webinar, Building Your Coaching Leader Manager Skills in a Digital World. This complimentary webinar is brought to you by Power You, which is a training, coaching, and management consulting company with offices in the Philippines. Our mission is to partner with organizations to enable them to deliver strong business results by enhancing their talent and leadership through value-adding strategic consulting solutions. In fact, the materials for this webinar are part of two coaching solutions of Power You. First, the coaching clinic, and second, the leadership series called Empowering Your Leadership in a Digital Future through Coaching. So you may actually visit the Power You website later to know more about these programs, and we invite you to do that. At this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Our speaker, Elaine Cercado, has worked for over 30 years with diverse teams from SMEs and multinational companies in emerging and mature markets in the Asia-Pacific region. During her corporate stints, she specialized in sales and regional general management, among others. In 2008, Elaine embarked on a second career in training, consulting, and coaching. Driven by her mission, discover, develop, maximize the power within you, she founded Power You Training and Coaching LLP, a company registered in Singapore where she's based or has been based since year 2000. Elaine, who is a practicing executive and corporate coach, received her coaching certifications as Core Essentials graduate and as coaching clinic licensed facilitator from the US-based ICF-accredited Corporate Coach U. Elaine is certified in training design, delivery, and assessment by Singapore WDA, IAL, and in management consulting by the Singapore Business Advisors and Consultants Council. Elaine has served as a leadership program facilitator for the World Bank Group and a senior learning and organizational development leader in NCS with a workforce of about 8,000 people in Singapore, and in IDC Asia Pac, with about 100 plus leaders in the regional headquarters. Currently, she manages leadership programs for Duke CE in Asia Pacific and in the UK, and she also serves as director, senior consultant, and coach of Power You Philippines and Singapore. Everyone, let's all welcome our speaker, Elaine Cercado.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me? June, can you hear me? Okay, so thank you very much. All right, what we will cover tonight will be as follows. So we will talk about being a coaching leader manager. Why is that important in today's world? When do we manage? When do we coach? And with that comes the question of when do we tell, when do we ask? We will also tackle a few simple but very hard to do coaching skills such as filtering, conversation. With conversation, very important skill of listening and inquiry and perspective. I went straight ahead because we have a lot to cover. We have limited time. And we want to also make sure that we have enough time for Q&A. We have distinguished panelists, Penny Bongato and June Marfori, of course, who will help answer some of your questions. So with that, let me get started. Good evening to all of you. I forgot to greet you all. Welcome to the webinar. And I'm calling in from Singapore, where I am based. So why is coaching in organizations very important in today's world? There are two research that I would quote as rational for this, very important, that that were the findings from this research. From Gallup, it said how long an employee stays at the company and how productive she is there is determined by her relationship with her immediate supervisor. And then from a management consulting in the US, their research indicated that the number one reason people quit their jobs is dissatisfaction with their supervisors and not their paycheck. So maybe some of you can relate. In corporate coaching, where, as June Marfori said, I am certified, we also learned that they surveyed hundreds of managers and leaders who have received the leadership coaching services. And there are three things that are very important that came out from their survey. One is that employees who are coached to performance rather than managed to performance are more committed to and invested in the outcomes of their work and achievement or of organizational goals. So keywords here being coached to performance rather than managed to performance. The second finding that's very important is that coaching, whether from an external coach or internal manager as coach, creates a safe environment where employees or coaches, as we call them in this context, are heard, understood, respected, and appreciated. So what happens is that employees or coaches feel inspired. You know, there's ownership, there's creativity, there's innovation. So overall, win-win. And the third finding, which is very important, is career self-reliance is really becoming a critical employee competencies. You know, especially in today's world where we have many millennials or Gen Ys in the workforce. Self-reliance is a key trait of the millennials, in which they would trade their skills and contribution for development and opportunity. Managers and leaders must coach their employees so that as they become career self-reliant, they also engage in continuous career development. So there you are, three surveys or findings that indicate how important it is, you know, to be coaching leaders and managers in today's world. Let me now switch and define what is a coaching leader, what is a coaching manager. So can I ask, what comes to your mind when you hear these three words? So for those who are, because we have live participants as well here in Singapore, perhaps you can write your answers. And then for those who are participating through the chat, perhaps you can write your answers. Let me give you some seconds or a minute. So what comes to your mind when you hear or see the word managers, leaders, coaching? Can you type your answers? June, I might need some help in reading some of the answers. Okay. I can see some of the answers now, actually. Collaboration and meeting of minds. Managers are bosses. Leaders are more into direction. Coaching is like mentoring. So I guess that's what Peter means. And from our live audience in Singapore, managers, boss, leaders, mentors, coach, facilitator. Are there any more answers coming up? The collaboration and meeting of minds. So this is from John Ong. So I believe this is about being leader or coaches, coaching. So managers tend to be more task-oriented or process-oriented. isn't it? Leaders are more into qualities and values. But what would be common between a manager and leader would be that both lead and manage people and performance. How about coaching? What is coaching? So these are some of the words that might come out when you talk about coaching. But let's try to answer that in more detail. Coaching, first of all, is not the same as advising or counseling, though they have a similarity. And what is that similarity? They all have the desire to help. You know, when you're a coach or advisor or counselor, how about coach, trainer, and mentor? They are also not the same. But again, they have a similarity. And what is that similarity? They all want to help. So, coaching, in short, is not a lot of things that we sometimes think it is. One, it's not purely management skills, although coaching draws on certain leadership skills and competencies. So there's some distinction, in fact, clear distinctions between management skill and leadership skills. Coaching is not therapy, advice, or counseling, although coaching uses some of the same communications and discovery tools. Coaching is also not mentoring, although as mentors or as coaches who mentor their coaches, they occasionally share their experiences and make introductions to their resources and networks. And coaching is not training, although coaching uses contemporary adult learning theories and focuses on accountability. And lastly, coaching is not consulting, although coaches will infrequently or sometimes provide their views instead of only evoking from the coachee. So if that is the case, what is coaching? This definition is from our coaching clinic. As June has said, there are two coaching programs or workshops that we offer. And this one is from our coaching clinic. Coaching is a refined process. So keyword here, it's a process of equipping people with the tools, knowledge, and opportunities they need to fully develop and be effective in their commitment to themselves, their work or vocation, and their organization. Furthermore, coaching is a design alliance focused on developing an individual to become their best self and contribute their best fit and talent. So it's a partnership between the coach and the coachee with the desired outcome to bring out the best self, okay, of the coachee. And this one, I like this definition. It's an ego-less process in which coachable moments are created. Coachable moments. What are these coachable moments? We say a coachable moment is when an individual is open to information to draw out that shift in thinking and behavior, that knowledge and behavior. So there's a shift, there is a transformation that happens during that coachable moment. And lastly, coaching is a professional discipline and skill set, and that's why we have certifications to be coaches, which enhances performance, action, creativity, momentum, and transformation. So just imagine if your workforce has all this: performance, action, creativity, momentum, and transformation. What an engaged and productive workforce that you can have. So then the question is, can you apply being a coach in your manager role? So let us look first at what are the roles of a manager. Okay, so what are the typical roles or duties that you have as a manager, or typical tasks that you have as a manager? Perhaps I can get some answers through the chat to keep you all awake. Let's keep the contributions or inputs going. Perhaps you have the task to design policies or implement policies and procedures, or you set targets and measures. Our participant here in Singapore said manage deliverables of a team, manage performance, manage resources, right? Deploy and manage resources. So can you actually implement a coaching approach to this? We at Power in You and in Coach, the coaching program that we implement, we say yes, definitely. We can have a coaching approach. We can actually utilize a conversation model whenever we talk with our employees, our coaches, our what we also call performers. We can create that safe environment, an open environment where a good conversation can happen, where transformation can actually happen and outcomes can be achieved. And how do you do that? Through multiple coaching skills, multiple coaching skills such as the ones that we'll touch on tonight, like filtering, listening, communication, inquiring or asking, and being coachable. What do we mean by being coachable? As coaches, actually, our key distinction and hallmark, number one, the first and foremost, is to be coachable ourselves. Let me then ask, as leaders and managers, when do we tell, when do we ask? Because this is when we can also apply being a coach, a coaching manager, a coaching leader to our employees, to our coaches. Can I get some answers? When do you usually tell or instruct or direct? And when do you usually ask? So I see some answers. I think planning day-to-day activities and responsibility. That was the answer to the previous question of what are the duties and activities. From John Ong, a manager provides direction and balance. For this question of when do you tell and when do you ask? As a manager, as a leader, do you tell? Do you ask? Do you do both? Do you do more of telling? Do you do more of asking?
Elaine?
Yes.
There's something here from John Marvin Ong. He says that when you tell, if the coachee has high motivation but less competent on the role.
Okay. And similarly, here in Singapore, Reggie, one of our attendees said, for people who have low skill, then the manager tells for those who have higher skills or competencies, then the leader or manager usually asks. So similar to what John has said.
Says that when do you ask?
And you're right. There's another one here. From Peter, you tell for junior employees or if activity is the first time to be done, and you ask for more senior competent staff. Okay, and that's very true. As coaching leaders or managers, there's a continuum. There's the balance of telling and asking, and this is represented in a continuum because at any point in time as a manager leader, because as a manager we lead and as a leader we manage, right? We use the telling and the asking. And when do we tell, when do we ask? The key, because we do all this as manager leaders, we tell what to do, we solve someone's problem, we give advice, we offer guidance, we ask questions, we help another solve problem. The more that you are on the left side, of course, you're more managing, you're more telling. The more you're on the right side, you are asking and helping and being a coach, being a leader in that sense. But it's not about do you coach more or tell more, do you ask more? It's the key here is knowing that coachable moment that you consciously discern and decide when to manage and when to tell and when to ask. So the key here to be a great coach is in fact using both the telling and asking and knowing when to tell and when to ask. Okay, because both are needed, as we know, as you've said here, both have its use. And as manager leader, we wear many hats at different points in time. And so we have to know when to tell and when to ask. When do we manage? When do we lead or coach? Now, in this program, of course, or in this webinar, we would focus more on the coaching part, on the asking part, okay? And in fact, that's one of the skills that we will be talking about. Now, we will be talking about a few simple but hard to do coaching skills. So we'll talk about filtering, conversation, and with conversation would be the listening and inquiry and the perspective skills. We will have time to answer questions later if you do have questions. Now, what I would like to ask you, what do you see? Can you just type what you see in this picture? Okay, I see an answer here in Singapore, old woman, a lady, a woman looking away, an old lady. And you're right. It's either you see an old lady or a young lady, right? Or a lady. Doesn't have to be old, doesn't have to be young. How about this one? What word do you see? Participants here in Singapore said victory, victory, victory. Okay. Does anyone see defeat? Or does anyone see both? Defeat and victory? Yes, okay. So there are participants who have typed yes, defeat or victory and defeat. How about this one? What word comes to your mind when you see this picture? One picture. I bet there are a few words, different words that would come out. Royalty, marriage, newlyweds. What do we have here? Love, joy, bliss. Lastly, let me show you 3 words and type the word that comes to your mind when you see these words. Millennials, women drivers, digital future. You can pick any of the words. In the interest of time, perhaps just pick one word. So I read here self-entitled diversity fintech. So self-entitled, I guess that's a millennial and diversity, right? Fintech, I'm not too sure if that is for the digital future, is it? Okay. Breaking barriers are women drivers. Agility, change. Are these more for the millennials? Okay. Millennials, agile, women drivers, empowerment, digital future technology. And in Singapore, we have assertive. You know, they speak their minds for millennials. So what did we just do? We just actually used our filters. You know, same word, same picture, same image, and yet we actually had different meanings, different perceptions. Why? Because we have our filters. And what impact do our filters have on our listening and our speaking? It's very important as coaches to be conscious or aware of the filters that we use. Why is that? What impact do these have on our listening and our speaking? Well, for one, we can have a biased judgment. That's one. Another is that we could turn off and not listen. If we are assuming something, it can cause miscommunication is another. And we can miss out on perspectives of our people, of our coaches or employees. Okay, there are a few more reasons probably or impact that you can think of, but those are the common ones. Now, how do we minimize? How do we intentionally minimize the impact of our filters in our speaking and listening? Any idea on that one? In coaching, there is what we call neutral language. So, as coaching leader or coaching manager, we should use as much as possible neutral language. And some of the ways that we can have neutral language is to use more of I statement rather than you. You is perceived to be more judgmental. So, for example, let me give you an example. Instead of saying, you are not clear about the objectives, perhaps you can say, I sense that you are unclear about objectives. How can I help you achieve clarity? Okay, so that's one way. The other could be stating fact instead of emotion. Okay, and making sure that the language is not leading to a particular path that you want or decision that you want as a manager leader. So that's just one example. Of course, there's a whole section about use of neutral language when we go into a coaching workshop. The other tip to minimize the effect of filter would be through contextual listening. And what do we mean by contextual listening? We'll talk more about this when we go into the conversation or listening skills. But contextual listening is really listening beyond the words. So it's listening to everything, our tone, our facial expressions, our gestures. Listening to what is not being said, not just the ones that are being said. And last tip would be to ask questions that are open-ended. Open-ended questions are very, very important in conversation skills. The use of what question instead of why would be preferred. A what question would bring out more perspectives and more open answers. So in summary, filtering is very important because our knowledge, experience, and intention filter what we hear and influence what we say. The second skill that I want to talk about, which is in that conversation skill, is the listening. Let me ask you, when someone talks to you, are you really listening or are you just waiting for your turn to talk? There are 5 levels of listening. One is when you are not really listening. Second is when you are listening selectively. We all do that. And third is when you are listening, but you're waiting for your turn to talk. This is a fake listening sometimes because you seem like you're listening. Fourth is what we call the active listening, and that is what we tend to do. But there is higher level of listening actually. As a coaching leader or manager, you can actually practice even a higher level of listening than active listening, and that is contextual listening, or sometimes we call it empathetic listening. Again, it goes back to what I mentioned about listening beyond the words, listening to what is not being said, listening to the emotion, listening to the deeper level. Okay, and what is that deeper level? I'll talk more about that shortly through a model that is very common. But before that, let me restate the fundamental laws of communication. The reality is not what A says, but what B understands. So it's always not just the intent, but the impact that matters. What A delivers should be what B receives, right? So communication is successful when the message that is sent is the same message that is received. If B misunderstands a message, A is always partly to blame. So it's both the sender and receiver that are important, not just the sender, not just the receiver, but both. It's impossible not to communicate. So even when we are silent, we are communicating. Hence, when our employee or coachee is not communicating, actually that says also something. And all communication takes place on 2 levels, the factual and the relationship level. What is this? I will describe this through the Iceberg Model. So the iceberg model is this. There's the factual level, which is usually what we communicate. This may include our goals, strategies, requirements, our organization, our targets, and so on. And then we have the relationship level. The relationship level would be the deeper ones. It would include our communication, our feelings, rather, our coach, our curiosity, our courage, our needs, our need for appreciation, our involvement, our uncertainties, our motives, values, habits. All of this are deeper. And as we see here in the image, it's even greater in size. And so one typical example would be the organization. When we communicate the organization, that's probably the organization structure. But when we ask questions, when we inquire, and when we listen, the right question can actually bring out better information. When you really listen to an employee or to a coachee about their needs or anxieties, it can bring out more than the organization structure. It can bring out informal relationships. Who decides what? Who is opposed to what? Who is aligned with what? Come out if the employee is open to talk about it, and if you as a manager or leader would really ask the right questions and listen, and of course apply the coaching conversation, which leads me to the next skill, which is asking better questions. When do we need to ask better questions? Okay, so we said earlier coaches can be called performers when they are stuck, so that they're not sure how to move forward. When they're learning new tasks, I think most of you have mentioned that, that especially junior staff or junior employees would need guidance, and of course asking the right questions would bring that out. When performers are enthusiastic but need help to create a plan, and when performers only have the partial information or could benefit from another point of view. And what are great questions? Great questions are open-ended and go beyond to inspire bigger or new thinking. Okay, so try to ask open-ended. We all know what open-ended is, I hope. Okay, so those that do not necessarily end into a yes or no answer, so it's open-ended, and typically you would use what, why, how, when, where. Okay, so but of course, what is what we recommend as a good question. Examples of good questions, or in fact, better questions. Would it help if we talk through your ideas and questions about this? Tell me more. Tell me more about them. Or perhaps you can say, I can see that you have a lot of interest in ownership for this project. Is there anything getting in your way? What is it? What, if any, is getting in your way? Okay, so these are just examples. There are more that we can think about, I'm sure. The last skill that I want to talk about, and we will, from here, we'll go into some panel discussion, would be perspective. Okay, so perspective. Perspective is most needed when performers or coaches feel overwhelmed, unsuccessful, stuck, hassled, unconfident, or unworthy. So they need you as a manager to facilitate critical thinking, contextual thinking, systems thinking. As coaches, or what we've been using here as a term, coaching leader or coaching manager, you can help as a coach. And these materials are now based on our Powering New Leadership series, which is based on our ATD workshop, Association for Talent Development, a US-based organization or association. We can actually use critical thinking to help performers assess the situation. So as coaches, you can ask questions so that your employees, your coaches, or performers can better evaluate what's happening, from a more critical standpoint. use systemic thinking to help performers see and consider connections and interdependencies. Because sometimes they get, what we say, very silo thinking. And so when we have very silo thinking, we only tend to see a very narrow point of view, right? We don't see the interconnectedness and interdependencies of things. Help performers put things into context, that nothing occurs in isolation. We work and progress in the environment. So what are some of the possible questions we can ask? We do have actually a more detailed guide to critical thinking, but let me just throw here a few examples of questions that we can use for critical thinking to get it started. Okay, so just to get it started, do you have the information that you need to move forward? If not, what do you need? What are you most worried about? And are your worries justified? Do you have the capacity needed to be successful? And from there, you can actually follow up with a discussion on how much you increase the capacity if it's not enough, and where are the bottlenecks. This sort of questions can actually bring about more discussions and hopefully solutions, that can help the employee achieve the outcome needed. And not just for the employee, but for the whole team, for the manager, leader, and for the whole team. At this point in time, I will stop and will be open for the questions, which June will open up through a panel, which will also include another panelist, not just June and myself, but also a guest panelist, Penny Bongato. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elaine. And so before we proceed, we'd like to welcome Penny. I think Elaine earlier mentioned Penny. He's also a trainer, consultant, and director of Power in You. So together with Elaine, yours truly, and Penny, we would be happy to answer any of your questions. Penny is also, by the way, a motivational speaker, an author, trainer, and a Canfield certified trainer and director of Power in You. Penny here, very quickly, has just also undergone the Accelerated Coach Training Program of Benchmark Consulting. At present, she's working with Cochise, who have been impacted due to the reorganization of their company. And she also coaches senior leadership team members, which results in better relationship with both team members and family. So I'd like to open the floor now as we have the members of the panel. Feel free to type in your questions here in the chat box.
And June, we do have a couple of participants here live in Singapore, so I'll also try to get their questions.
Okay, Elaine, very quickly, a question that's come up here is, in a 40-hour work week, how much time is it advisable to spend on coaching time?
Very good question. My question there is, when do you think is a coachable moment? Okay. A coachable moment, as I mentioned earlier, I define a coachable moment as that moment in time when the employee is open to new information that can shift the behavior, the knowledge and the behavior. And when does that happen? That happens all the time, isn't it? So coaching can happen all the time and anytime. It can happen in 5 minutes, it can happen in 30 minutes, or in 1 hour kind of coaching session. In fact, the most effective that I've found are those 5-minute to 10-minute kind of coaching conversations, coaching moments, a coachable moment. So I'm not sure if I answered the question of Peter. You might have another perspective or answer, June or Penny, but to me, I cannot quantify it because that coachable moment can happen anytime, anywhere. And as a manager leader, you have to be conscious of that, recognize that, and use that moment.
I would have to agree, Elaine, that ideally there is no time constraint, restriction, or time limit to coaching time. Actually, any moment is a coachable moment. To add that you mentioned to the question of Peter, though, I would say that if the coachee and the coach have a mutual agreement to set aside a specific time to do a coaching moment or conversation or dialogue, let's say it be once every 2 weeks from a Friday, second and fourth Friday from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, then the coachee has an appreciation that that time is set aside for the coach to be able to provide a context, an environment where he or she can help the coachee realize his or her untapped as well as realizable potential. But to your point, Elaine, I would have to agree as well that any moment is a coachable moment. And we hope that that has answered your question, Peter. Elaine, there's another question here which probably give you and Penny also an opportunity to respond to. Again, what is a good ratio for coach and coachees?
Okay. My answer there is it's more of a function of the time that can be committed by the coach and of course the coachee. But I guess because there are less coach, right? Normally in the organization there are more coaches, potential coaches, because there are more employees compared, for example, to a coaching leader or coaching manager who is qualified and who is committed to do it. So it's really more of a function of time that the coach can commit to this journey to partner with a coachee. But in this context of corporate coaching, normally as the manager or leader, if you have 10 members in your team, then you will probably have to coach all the 10 members, all the team 10 members, or all the 5 team, if you have 5 team members. Now it's a matter of how much do you spend with member A versus member B, member C? And that goes back to my first question or first answer of having a coachable moment. Because that coachable moment for a member A might differ from a member B. The readiness of the coach is very important. Remember, one of the hallmarks or distinctions is being coachable. So how coachable is member A versus member B? That is a key question. June, Penny.
Right. Yeah, well, in the interest of time, why don't we turn this next question over to Penny, and then Elaine can jump in as well. Here's a question from Melissa Wong, or Yong, I should say. Pushing up the question of John Marvin, as I have the same dilemma. If the coachee is already experienced and competent, but might be less motivated. So I guess the question is, how do you approach a coachee who is already experienced and competent, however, is less motivated? So we'll throw that to Penny as well as to Elaine at this point.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Penny.
Okay, that would be a very interesting dilemma, quote unquote. Pardon the background, I'm home. I'm taking care of my grandson for those who are on the call. Again, that's a very interesting coaching conversation. The conversation then would be what motivates him or her, or why, again, not asking the why, but what will keep that person motivated. So the experience is there. The question of the motivation is the one that could be a coachable conversation. So finding out the motivation of that person is the starting point for the coaching. Elaine?
What was the question again, June? Sorry.
The dilemma is if the coachee is already experienced and competent but might be less motivated. How do you approach that?
Okay. Well, as a leader, coaching will not answer everything, of course. Yeah, number one to me, the number one thing that occurred to me is that coaching will not answer everything. Okay. So you probably have to utilize a mix of skills. One is coaching, the other could be, of course, really managing people skills, which includes coaching. Okay. And with that, of course, your listening skills, your questioning skills, your filtering, your use of neutral language, and so on. And the other thing that's critical will be motivating the person. And in motivating a person, this is now going into a slightly different topic, but of course we can use the coaching skills. In motivating a person, it's very important that we know the level of the competence of the person and the level of the motivation of the person, right? When we know the level of the motivation and the level of the competence of the person, then we can apply the right leadership style or the right leadership skill for that person, and then utilize the relevant coaching skills. So let me give you one example. If the coachee or the performer is very competent but has low motivation, okay, then you probably need to give more challenging jobs. Okay. And when you give more challenging jobs, come, of course, that conversation. You need to have a conversation with that person. And then from there, you will use your coaching skills, right, to ask the question, to listen to the person, and to get into the process of planning for an action for a desired outcome. On the other hand, if the person is highly motivated but not that competent yet, maybe you are assigning him or her to a new job or to a new project, then you probably need to guide the person more. You probably need to supervise the person more, because the enthusiasm is there, the energy is there, and yet the competence level or skill level might be not that high yet. So the type of questions you will ask then will also matter a lot, and the type of guidance that you will give will matter a lot. So coaching might not answer everything, but the coaching skills that we have talked about will be very important, in that situation. I hope that gave you some insights or perspective too.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, Penny, as well. We're down to the last 8 minutes, and we'd like to reserve maybe the remaining few minutes to just the last two or three questions. We have two on the screen right now, and I'll throw it to Penny or Elaine, and I'll help out when there's time. Question here that first came out is, how can I make sure that I don't intentionally or unintentionally tell what to do my coachee? So I guess we can take off from one of your slides earlier, Elaine, where telling is not coaching. Would you like to take a first crack at that for a minute or two, Elaine?
Okay. Firstly, is the context of coaching is that we ask more. So we have to ask better questions. And it's not a comfortable thing to do, right? We're not used to asking. As managers or leaders in the organization, we are used more to telling, to be more directive. The typical structure, at least from my generation, has been more of a command and control. But we are now managing a workforce, millennial workforce, where command and control will not work. And so, in fact, we have to force ourselves to ask more, to be more coaching in our style. And that means really practicing, coming up with questions, probably even listing the questions that you want to ask at first if you're not used to asking, and practicing how to say that. And when you list the questions, preferably use open-ended, neutral questions. And then always think of whose agenda is this? Because telling is from the manager's agenda. This is what I want you to do, okay? So I tell you what to do. But leading and asking, whose agenda is that? That is the agenda of the coachee. So if you think about the coachee's agenda, what would my coachee, what would my performer, what would my employee like to come, to achieve from here, to come out from here. Okay, so I think that will help the mindset, the practice, the asking will help. And then again, I'll go back to recognizing the coachable moment. Recognize that coachable moment so that when you know that this is a time that I can coach a person, I will use the asking style, the asking rather than the telling. June?
Yep. Thank you very much, Elaine. We're probably down to the last two questions. So let me just hand this last question over to Benny and see if we have time to answer any question that might come up after this. Penny, the question here is, my dilemma is that the coachee is not open to change because they think that it is added work. So I guess the question is, how do you provide effective coaching to this individual if this is the mindset of this potential coachee? Penny?
Okay, thank you for that question, June. As we said, that there are some people who are coachable and there are people who are not coachable, and we have to be open to uh, knowing whether that person, you have to coach or you have to manage or you have to tell. In this situation we're in, people are not coachable because they feel that it's added work. Again, as Elaine mentioned, asking the powerful questions, asking and making them realize why this added work is important. For example, you have to cross skill, you have to upskill. How do you make that person realize that upskilling and reskilling or cross skilling is important? What's in it for them? So asking those powerful questions, and Elaine mentioned about powerful questions and what kind of questions. I was just looking at my notes. So I have, this is coming from LinkedIn for people to see. LinkedIn ICF powerful questions. So it's available online and it's very thick. You can get guidelines on how to ask powerful questions. So added work, again, how do you make them realize that this added work is perhaps something that could benefit them? Asking those questions on why is it important for them as well, and continue working with your coaches about that. At least that's from my perspective. Elaine?
None from me. I think there's a few more questions actually, but I don't know if we have time to answer them, June.
Yep, Elaine, I think absolutely just last question. So I apologize.
I have one question also here from Singapore actually.
All right. All right then.
Yeah, but what is your question, June?
Well, this is a follow-up to the question of Trish, where Trish asked, how do I make sure that I don't unintentionally tell? The follow-up question is this: what if we ask, but the response we got is not what we think should be done? How do I handle that? I might end up leading him through asking. Looks like this is for you, Elaine.
But the response we got is not what we think should be done. Okay. Well, it's very hard, right? Because at the end of the day, we, as a manager, we would still have a desired outcome or output. Okay. And that is why, as I mentioned earlier, the key to great coaching is knowing when to tell and when to ask. Okay. So there are moments when the asking doesn't work anymore. So you will have to use also telling. Telling has its own merits and has its own purpose. As a manager, we wear many hats. And sometimes we're a cheerleader, sometimes we're a challenger, sometimes we're a coach, sometimes we just have to be the command and control. Okay, and so the key is really discerning, being able to discern, and that comes with practice and experience. So the more that you do it, the more that you will know when is that moment that you tell and you ask. June?
Unfortunately, this is just about the time that we have for this, and so we will have to draw this to a close. And we want to thank Elaine and
Thank
Penny.
you.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thank you, Penny, for participating in that panel. And we certainly hope that you have enjoyed this webinar. And just to make sure that you don't miss out, we are encouraging you to please subscribe to www.powernew.com.ph to get the latest updates on events, webinars, and free resources from PowerNew and its partners. Just to announce, our next free webinar will be on July 17, and our topic will be Building a Digitally Proficient Talent Bench by Assessment Analytics Managing Director Det Arwego. Everyone in this webinar will automatically get an email invite today, so we hope you can join us on July 17 as well. Now, before we end, I'd like to invite you also to 2 public workshops, which we will have in July and September. They're called the Strategies of Success and the Vision Board Workshop. These workshops will be given by none other than Penny Bungato, who is the first Jack Canfield certified trainer in the Philippines and the first in Asia as well. And for those who do not know, Jack Canfield is the originator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, and he's affectionately known as America's #1 success coach. We also have a special package. Those who will register for both workshops will only pay 1,800. So we suggest highly that you register now while there are slots left. And let me just remind everyone that you will be given access to the recording of this webinar. This will be shared through your email within the next 24 to 48 hours after this webinar. So aside from the recording, you'll also receive details of the workshops of Penny. So before we close, we just like to thank all of the participants. We believe we have some attendees from as far as Germany, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, United States, and of course from the Philippines. So once again, from PowerNew, in behalf of the directors, we would like to say thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope that you can join us again in our next webinar. Good day and goodbye. Thank you.